Hello. So I wanted to teach you today about glazing, which is an old master's technique that as acrylic artists we get to do and adopt from. First of all, I have this headphone. And I have to say, I do feel a little bit geeky, but I was having trouble with my mic. So hopefully this helps us with that problem. So as usual, we're going to get right to the paint. Here, let me just switch over. So what we're going to do is a method called grisaille. And grisaille is a method that the masters use. And Vermeer was a good example, except he used oil paint. And when you use oil paint, you have to let things dry a lot, like sometimes 6 months in between. And with the acrylic, it should be like 40 minutes. You can put another coat on. So I have a painting I've prepared here. It's just on board, and it's done in black and white. Okay, it looks has a bit of a bluish tinge, and I think that's because I used Payne's gray, but doesn't matter which black that you use. Now, traditionally, this was something that the masters would have let the students do, and that's because the black and white paint were quite cheap, and so they could do it. Usually, the master would draw the cartoon or the picture first, and sometimes they would push holes in the drawing and then lay that paper on top with the holes. They would take some charcoal and they would, it's almost like a powder puff, and they would pounce the drawing, and you'd get all these, lift off the paper and you get all these dots. Then the apprentices could go dot by dot, mapping out the picture. They would let the good apprentices would get to paint the picture in black and white paint. The white paint was made from milk. Black paint was from charcoal from the fire. So they were easy to do. And then after that, the master would swoop in and would put the final coat of the paint on. And one of the colors they used, and I don't have it here, I realize, on right on my table, but it's ultramarine blue, and ultra means beyond, so beyond the ocean. And that was a common color used in grisaille painting. It was more expensive than gold, and that's because it was traded along the spice trail. So every time someone, traded it, it cost a little bit more. That was made from lapis in Afghanistan. And so, of course, as the master painter, you wouldn't waste that paint. You would want just a fine layer. And this is why the grisaille method was introduced. It was a way to make these beautiful transparent layers of paint. Now, as I said, we can mimic that with acrylic. So what we're going to do is use a liquid gloss medium. You could use a glazing medium. Um, it works just as well. Liquitex glazing medium actually is formulated to dry a little bit faster, but this one will work as well. So as with all mediums, when you put them out, I should have tested yeah, oh, good. All mediums, when you put them out, they look white like this. You can see the consistency of that. It's quite, almost like syrup. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of the pigments and add it to that and make transparent layers. Now, to do this, it's best if you pick a pigment that's already transparent. So when you look at this, here it says semi-opaque or opaque. Actually, that quite surprises me. This yellow is semi-opaque, it says. Usually yellow is a very transparent pigment. I'm still going to use it though. It's one of my primaries. This one, the next one is quinachrome crimson. I love this color. And again, you can see this little square on the front or a square on the back, and it says transparent. So that one's a good transparent color. I'm going to use phthalo blue. Okay, so again, when we switch phthalo to the back here, it says it's transparent. It'll tell us the pigment number too. So PB, which is pigment blue 15:6. So that's what phthalo blue is. I also have this new blue that I've fallen in love with, and it is an opaque color. Now, you can use opaque colors to do glazes. It just doesn't work as well. It's like you're fighting against the nature, but we'll see. I might put a little bit of that in there. I did put it out because I'm just in love with that color. And another one is umber. Again, it's an opaque pigment, but I can use this pigment and change it up a little bit, add the medium and make it so that it's more transparent. I'm using just a soft brush. That's the best way to use this. This is the Liquitex 12 Bright. And as I said, I've pre-painted this, so it's all dry in black and white. So the first thing, this part of it will go really, really fast. I'm going to create this yellow. So just a little bit of a yellow and lots of pigment. That yellow is probably a little bit too cool. So I'm just going to touch with, look how tiny, tiny little bit of that red just to influence. Might do a little bit more. Don't want too much because then it goes too orange, whoop, like it did just there. Now, if that happens, that's no big deal. Just, I'm going to use some of that color in there, but probably what I want to do is take another batch here. Instead of mixing the yellow in here to make more and more, I'm just going to pull aside some of that color and alter it over here. Okay, I think maybe I can put a little bit more yellow. Okay, yeah, that's a nice bright yellow. Again, we could add a little bit more pigment medium. That's what that is. Medium, the way to think about medium is that it's just colorless paint. Okay. You know what? When I look at that and I put that first bit on, I'm going, ooh, I could make it a little bit stronger. You just want to make sure that when you're doing the grisaille method and you're glazing, that you can see through it. Okay, now that was that problem I talked about before about it being maybe a little bit too acid tone. I want to warm it up a little bit. And all I have to do is just put in, I could even take a smaller brush. Let's do that. Just pull out this. This is another type of Liquitex. It's a fairly soft bristle. That's what we want. And I'm just going to lay this color, okay, in here. Now I want to put it on just sort of one stroke. I can mix the color once it's on there. So I've got this, I put that umber in there because that's a good color to kind of warm up and gray down the colors. You see that tone, just a little bit of warmer tone. And I'm gonna, again, just mix my pigments a little bit stronger. I always find that when I'm glazing, one of the things, you can always go back and change the pigments. You can always go darker, is what I mean, but it's hard to go lighter. So when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're not going on it too strong. Okay, look at that. So all that work that's on there, we can see. It's all still there. It's just you're putting this transparent color. So it's almost like magic when you get to this. Now, this little brown jug here, I don't want to paint the milk on it. I can even add a little bit of blue to the inside of that just to emphasize the shadows. And then we have this beautiful, these jugs here. They could be a little bit blue. Each color I'm putting on, I'm mixing medium in. So you're throwing in the medium. And I always say that if people like Vermeer had access to acrylics, perhaps he would have painted more of his wonderful masterpieces because, there's not too many of them known in the world. And that's because it's a very slow process to do this with oils. And so, we have the modern acrylics, why not use them? That inside there, I'm just going to pump it up with a bit of color, make it an orange color. Whoops, I almost painted that without putting in the medium. I might bring that up a little bit more. Now, if I'm washing my brush, I'm going to be taking a cloth and pulling out all of the medium. The reason why is I don't want more water in this. And if you're using the medium gel, the medium liquid glazing medium, you want to make sure that you're not adding water to it. Okay, so it's formulated so you don't need water. So then we have this blue of the skirt. Same thing. I can come in a little bit stronger with those blues. As long as I don't go too far. If I start painting this and it's not transparent, that means I have to stop. I would stop and wipe it off actually, because what's happening then is that all this work that you've done before isn't being shown. Now you can alter these colors. Like once you've got it painted on here, one of the things you could do wet into wet while, you have a little bit of time. You'll notice that, I don't even need a small little brush. I don't want to fool around too much with this. That's getting probably at the end of our color range. I can see through it, but it's starting to, really not be as transparent. After this is dry, I can come back and do some work on it and do a little bit more color mixing. There's a little bit of a blue rag here. One of the things when you're doing this, you'll notice on my palette that I don't have any white. Because that's not a glaze. You can use white and medium and then veil things, but right now we're just talking about mediums. So when I'm looking at something like the background of this picture, I want to make sure that I just had to check there to make sure I was still adding the gloss medium because I have my table's a mess here. I want to make sure this is really light. So this is where you watercolor painters really come into your in your own here, because you know how to lighten things by adding more water. But instead of water, what we're going to do is we're going to add more of the medium, and that's how we're going to get those lighter tones. Now it goes quite green here, so I'm going to just mix this a little bit stronger here, and it goes kind of that greenish shade in the corner here. Actually, I could even get away with doing that a little bit greener. So, let's try it. There's no absolute science to this. I know if you go on the Liquitex site, they tell you the best way to do this is about 10 parts medium, 1 part of paint. That's a guideline. I find with those ones that, the best way that you learn is that you just keep trying. And as you try, you kind of go, oh yeah, that worked better. That doesn't work. And so it really becomes like a feeling. I want this, notice I'm doing one direction when I'm doing this. I want this to really make sure that I'm not seeing those brush strokes. That's where that other brush was probably a bit better because it was just a little bit softer. So you can come afterwards and just pull in. I had the medium on there already, so that's a great way to do a transition. I could even do this darker down here. So let's say we're mixing with the blue, a little bit of blue and a little bit of the brown. And here, a bit more of the blue. Oop. And I can have it a transition with the medium where I'm going darker to lighter. After this is all done, I could also decide that, hey, I want to put another coat on it. So maybe I want to intensify some of these colors. I want to change the temperature a little bit because that also will help with something the medium can do. All of those things can be done. Okay, so there we go. Let's put a little bit more of a shadow in that one. That looks good. Now for the skin color, kind of tricky. Again, I don't want it to be too dark. It's going to be kind of weird because what I'm doing here is I'm taking some of that green that I had and I'm mixing just a touch of red into it. And that's going to give you a really nice kind of brownie tone. I don't want her to look too dark or too pale. So I'm just going to put it, oh, that's not too bad there. Okay, look, I can do her whole face. I've already done the hard work on this, so I don't need to do more. There's actually, her face is a little bit darker, so I can pull out some of those darker tones and glaze them in while it's wet. And then her hands, have to admit, I really had a hard time. Part of it is because it's small. And part of it was just hands are hard to do. So I kind of thought, oh my gosh, her hands look a little bit like claws. But then I thought, okay, we're just going to get over it and come back and do what we can do. Okay, maybe a little bit more orange in those pots, those areas. There's some nice buns in here. So that's what this pile is. So let's paint them up. There's some darker areas in there. So again, you can come while it's dark. Well, it's dark. While it's wet, you can come in. It's like I can't talk today. Okay, now this part here, again, I don't want it. You always are playing with the glazing between getting it too dark and getting it just right. Okay, so it's kind of a purpley brown. I wanted that to be different than the other one. I can still come back in with that orange color. So I'm mixing that orange up. I have too much red in that mixture. There we go. And then pulling in some of those mediums that I already have. Coming in, brightening it up a little bit. There's this beautiful basket color up here. And again, when you look at it and you go, oh, I'd like that to be lighter. Remember, not to pull out your white, but just to mix it a thinner. It's actually quite a nice orange color. There we go. And there's a little bit of a orange light here. So let's just put that on. This windowsill goes back to that darker color. So I can get away with, I'm mixing two kind of opaque colors, but I do want to make them, so I'm using the indigo and the umber, but I do want to make them slightly transparent. So I am pulling in some of those other piles of color and then putting it on. Okay, could be a little bit more. And let's just darken that up there. Oop. I'm going to pull in a little bit more of this warmth here. So even though that's an opaque color, I've made it so that it's looking a little bit less opaque by mixing it. There's a little shadow in here that I didn't paint, but we could put that in. While this is all wet, you have a chance or an opportunity to kind of do a bit of blending. And that's what we're going to do here. Okay, again, some of those shadows. This part here I'm finding is just when I'm looking at it just by itself, I'm going, oh, that's a little bit too light. And part of that is I've changed the composition here. And so what's happening is that there's part of the picture missing. And so I'm getting this dark line that was right at the edge there. And I didn't like that. Whenever you have a line that runs parallel to the edge of a canvas, you know, that's where you're going to put the frame on it. That just draws too much attention to itself. You don't want that. And so that's one of the reasons why I changed that. Okay, some of this goes quite dark, but let's start with this green first. And then as it's wet, we can do a little bit of opportunity painting where we're painting in wet into wet. Some of this green, I see a little bit of that in her little kerchief here. So let's put that in. I see a little bit of that in her sleeves. So again, we're going to put that in there. This now we need that darkness, that hit, because it's in shadow right now. It looks like it's kind of floating. I probably, when I painted this, I tried to keep the tones a little bit lighter, because sometimes what the problem with this type of painting is that it goes, as you glaze in, it gets darker and darker and darker. And I didn't want that to happen. So I probably overcompensated, but that's okay. Now, you can also take a brush and let me see what I have here. I was trying to do this all in one or two brushes. Here, again, I don't like that transition. So I can just take it and soften it a little bit. Because we're working wet into wet, that's great. This is dried enough. I can even take some of this darker color and stick some of that, just a touch of it in, just to make it a little bit more dramatic. Speaking of drama, that's where we get this phthalo blue. I remember teaching with a lady who said, that phthalo blue is a bit of a bully. That's what she would tell the kids. And I always thought that's a good way to look at it because it can overtake things, and that's not good. But it can be a good thing as well. Martha Stewart, a little can be a good thing. Okay. Okay, so maybe just here, just a touch, just to give that a bit of a tone. Don't like that hard edge that's coming across there. So that's my quick little method in how to do. Oh, so I'm looking at it and I'm going, oh, you know what? I could probably do just a little bit more like that face. Let's give her some rosy cheeks. So this is one that now I would let sit and dry, and then I'd look at it, and that's when I would decide, well, maybe it needs a little bit more. Maybe just, a touch here and there. So I'm just mixing a nice pink color. Let's give her, because she's been baking all day, she's gonna, whoops, have that those rosy cheeks. And maybe even put some of that pink color into here so her arms don't look as anemic. So that's my demo on glazing. It's something that if you want to do, it's a great little method to do. Start first with the grisaille where you're painting in black and white. And then what you're going to do is add the other color. I should really let this dry before I'm mucking around in it. That's an old world method that we can play with and do. Oh, let me just take one last shot. So while this is still wet, I'm looking at it through my camera and I'm going, you know what? I don't like this line. So look, I can lift off the paint a little bit too. You have a little bit of a sweet time in there that you can play around with things. And then it's gone too far. And I think that's sort of where I am right now. So I'm going to have to let it dry and then come back to it. But there's a demonstration on glazing. As I said, that's something we can borrow from the old masters. And then it's something we can do with acrylic. I can let this paint. It's already painted. I can let this dry and then I can come back to it and put another layer on it. And I might do that to intensify some of the colors. You can also use glazing to change up the temperature of something. So I use this in my own painting a lot. If I'm working on a sky, for example, and I'm looking at part of it and I go, you know what? I just want that cooler. Or sometimes I want it warmer. Either way, again, pick a pigment that is transparent, that works to your advantage, build it up slowly. So you put it on there, let it dry, and then come back at it. There's lots of different ways that you can use glazing in your acrylic paintings. And I hope that this video has helped you find a new technique. And so go ahead, go out there and paint. Thanks.